was trained at Sambhaag in Kolkata, a school that we did not and after completing her education there, came to the U.S. to a master's in music, taught my wife and her, my brother-in-law since childhood. She continues to teach music. Even my children are now learning. So she created a within Sangha, it's a microcosm of your existence. I don't want to get too philosophical on you. I think it's important to take within Sangha and how it relates to exactly the same. My family and I took a trip to Bharat the first half of March. In the last several years, I've gone to Bharat every few years, every 2 or 3 years. And every time I go, I see that the uniformity is becoming more and more complete. You go to any large metro in Bharat, Delhi, Bangalore, Kolkata, Mumbai, and the differences you used to see between yourself and the local people 15 years back, non-existent today. Dress, eyeglass frames, or shoes, or hairstyles are indistinguishable. Ever since the globalization, or rather economic liberalization door was opened in Bharat in 1991, we are 20 years into that process. And the globalization, the uniformity of that culture is becoming a reality. Whereas a Hindu American of Bharatiya origin living in America, and you compare yourself to your counterparts in Bharat, there's almost no distinction now. In fact, my speaking of English is as normal in Bharat as it is here. Right? 70 years after Bharat's independence, and we see that the English language is even more in demand now in Bharat than it's been at any time in independent Bharat history. So we see this process of globalization, westernization. It's making the world uniform. So the price of the unity is uniformity. The beauty of dharma and of what we're trying to do in Sambhaag is to have a unity, but to have the diversity as well. Right? The anekta mein ekta. And we see that as an organizing principle for human society, it is only dharma which allows for anekta mein ekta. And now we get to the Ghosh, right? Even the Pradarshan that we just saw, as a microcosm, a living example of anekta mein ekta. Right? Rudra ji and Aparna ji were the telling everyone what to do. Right? They basically represent, for our purposes here, dharma. And if every individual lives in dharma, we have a beautiful harmony, a beautiful symphony. But the individual character of each person, what instrument he plays, that's something that is still yours. Right? That's where the anekta comes in, the diversity comes in. A marching band that had only drums would sound monotonous. A marching band that had only vamshi would sound monotonous. But because we have the anekta within our Ghosh, we have this symphony, this harmony. But should any of you decide to ignore Rudraji or Varnaji, should any of you decide, I'm going to play how I want to play? Basically, if you want to ignore dharma, then it doesn't sound right. Right? We have a discord. We have a cacophony instead of a symphony. And what we see in our human society today, not just looking at Hindu society, broadly speaking, human society, right? We know that as a modern society, we're not living within the rules of dharma. Which is why we see any problem that exists. That's why they exist. Whether we look at environmental issues, whether we look at issues of poverty, whether we look at issues of civil rights and human rights. All the problems that face us in society today exist for a very simple reason, that as a society we're not composed of individuals who are living according to dharma. So just as the band sounds bad if one or other instruments are not following dharma, so our society. So we have in the Ghosh, where we had in your Pradarshan today, a microcosm of what a harmonious society can be. We're setting for ourselves an ideal that if we live according to dharma, we can have harmony. We can have unity without necessarily having uniformity. In Sangha, in the Ghosha, in all of our activities that we do, we are simply living a very ancient dharmic principle. Right? That the aim of a human life ultimately, as far as attaining moksha, is to destroy the ego, the ahankar. And this is the very important, again, a living example that we saw in the Pradarshan. Right? Whether it's when you play, whether it's how you play, whether it's you're turning right, you're turning left, any of the activities that you perform in the pradarshan, following dharma, and not following your own inclination, your own instinct, your own ichcha. If you simply do what you want to do, the whole thing falls apart. And so this whole process of subduing the ahankar, recognizing if I limit my ego and I'm willing to cooperate and work with others and willing to follow the karmic principle, it all comes together in a splendid harmony, in a splendid symphony. So I know many of you think, okay, Ghosh is fun, it's just playing instrumentals, having music, and it is fun. I'm not saying it shouldn't be fun. You should enjoy it. And there are other practical reasons why the Ghosh Varg exists within Sambhaag. Definitely in a Bharat context, the whole pradarshan, as far as actually taking a march out in the main street of a city, right? That happens on major utsavs in Bharat, Vijayadashmi, primarily other utsavs as well. You see the Ghosh Varg and the locals coming out. Northeast Vibhag may be the only, or Northeast Sambhaag may be one of the few places where the Ghosh activity in our HSS US is advanced enough. We probably could do that. If there's a parade, Thanksgiving Day parade, Memorial Day parade, where the parade is, there's HSS floating that parade, we can have an actual Ghosh following it, and actually sounding good. Not just marching with instruments and whatnot, but actually sounding good. So we have that practical aspect too, where people can see what we're doing, see our activity. But the other part of this, and in fact the whole role of music in our lives, is all about this harmony of combining and rosh, combining the beat with the melody, which again is a reflection of the whole creation around us. So I think I got a little too philosophical. Hopefully no one's nodded off from that. But I just want you to keep bearing in mind that the fun activity of Ghosha has this other layer to it, this other meaning to it. Right? It's a living example of living in accord with Dharma. It's a very live example of our work in Sangha, of trying to bring people together, different backgrounds, different stages of life, but working together, cooperating together. It's a very tangible way for us to see the success of the work we do in Sangha. We're developing our skills, we're developing our ability to cooperate, we're developing, or rather I should say we're subduing the ahankar and willingness to be part of a team. This is a very practical way to see a living example of that development. So there's those words. I want to wish you again, congratulate you on a very successful Ghosh Varg. It was a very impressive pradarshan. And I know where we are in Southwest Sambhaag, we've not had this type of activity yet. And maybe we can take some inspiration from our Northeast Sambhaag and bring some of that back home to Texas and try to develop that activity there as well.